I would define racism as selecting a specific type or group of people and saying that they do these things because of their race. It's in their nature to do these things, and you associate their race with what they do. And I think that's what racism is.
I mean, I think racism can be defined um, in a lot of different ways. It can be more technical, it can be sort of broad, but for me, I think it just encompasses um, acting towards someone um, in a different way than you might towards someone else, and justifying those actions on the grounds of their skin color, their ethnicity, their background, um, and kind of allowing yourself to treat someone differently based on that single qualifier. And of course, oftentimes that has negative connotations. So justifying a behavior that I would never do to someone of my family, of someone of my kin, but saying that it's okay to do it to this person because of their skin. But it can be just more generally treating someone different for that simple reason.
Okay, thank you.
I would say racism is defined as any sort of discrimination in a negative light towards a certain people of a certain race.
I would define racism to be antagonistic, intentional prejudice against some group based upon their race, ethnicity, personal background.
Okay.
And that can come in the form of stereotypes, direct insults, and other passive and more aggressive ways.
So I think racism is the treatment of someone based on their race, and I would define race as, I think, simplistically, it's just the color of someone's skin. I think that is the most, usually, the most basic kind of way that people perceive race. And there can be a more technical definition, but based on how your color of your skin as well as your facial features, I think that. And so it's treating someone or behaving towards someone in a particular way based on how they look.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very fortunate to have, spent most of my life growing up in places where I have, been able to pursue what I want to pursue and been in this very supportive environment, even though I've always been a minority race. So I definitely find myself very fortunate in a situation where I don't feel like I've been constantly sort of outwardly berated, but I think you see forms of racism in all different levels, and even if it's not really outwardly maybe violent or explicit, you see it in sort of underlying tones in people's language, just sort of negative comments about, there's the extreme of, or the extent of just like making jokes that you're aware that are racist and dismissing it, but if you look deeper than that, you can actually pick up sort of tendencies that people have in their language. Various family members who have come from abroad who say things negative about even white people, and their upbringing. Those are racist comments, regardless of what direction they go, whether it's from the minority to the majority or majority to the minority. I see it when we go back to India, and you see people of lower castes, of lower income, being treated so poorly, treated as subhuman on the basis of what they were born into. So I've seen it, you hear about, you read about it all the time. I'm fortunate on my particular college campus. I haven't seen as much of it firsthand, but I think that's 100% not true of so many places in this country, and it's still incredibly prevalent. Yeah.
Okay, and final question. Do you have any personal experiences with racism? And if so, are you okay sharing with it? Or would you rather just say yes or no and that's that?
Yeah, I think I've definitely experienced, expectation based on, my ethnicity. So what things I should be good at, what things I am supposed, because I'm Indian, I'm supposed to be good at math, or things that are just sort of dropped kind of casually, and it's not like they kind of really hit me and debilitate me on a regular basis, but I'm aware of it. Definitely aware, and maybe sort of on the gender side is not explicitly racism, but it's a form of discrimination, and dealing with being in a tech environment. I've sort of outside of the college scene, I've been in places where white male is the predominant, respected individual in a workplace, and there's gender there, and there's also race there, and as being someone who is decently confident in themselves, that's something that I can sort of work through and push back a little bit, but it's still frustrating to know that there's sort of this expectation set before you even open your mouth and say anything.
Well, I don't go outside the world very much, so I probably see racism once a week, I would say.
What forms?
What forms? Actually, racism is probably more like once a month, but I see a lot of stereotypes, is what I see.
So for me, I see it maybe not overtly, so maybe not obviously, but I think in more subtle things. I wouldn't say intentions are always to be racist. I think a lot of us, including you and I, just have subtle inclinations to do certain things or act differently around certain types of people. And it's not always in a negative light, so certainly it could not be, in some cases it might not be considered to be racism, and that's fine. But there are certain things that we do on a daily basis that makes us and kind of reveals our discrimination towards other people. And I see discrimination not only in a negative light, but in every sense of the word, right? So everything from you discriminating towards what kind of keyboard you'd want to buy for your games, you discriminate.
Yeah. I think for me, especially as being a member of the STEM community, that there is some, maybe not very direct racism ingrained into the system, but kind of years of racism that have built up and brought STEM to where it is today. It historically is not a very diverse academic group. And until recently, MUD has also not been a particularly diverse school, but that's something that they've been really working on. And you do see, but if you look at the percentage of, African Americans to Asians to Caucasians to South Asians to Latino to Hispanic, you see them around school. It's not very homogenous and not very equally separated.
Yeah.
So that would be one way I would say directly engage with it on a day-to-day basis.
I don't. This is what's interesting about racism is because it's often seen as something negative. Like when you're treated, like when people treat you in a negative way, that's racism. But I think you experience racism in both directions. Like when I spent time in Asia, or like say in China, I would be treated differently because I was white, and that's racism. They would be, I think, in some ways they would be nicer to me, and they would treat me. It's strange, but they would interact with me in a different way, and overall that was positive. But to me, that's racism as well.
I think for me, at a very obvious level, I don't experience racism or see it very much on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. This is largely because I'm lucky enough to live in a community and be engaged with people that don't very actively tolerate racist ideas and principles and don't act on behalf of them. However, I do think that in very subtle ways, racism is observed day to day in all our lives, even if we're lucky to be in this kind of situation. I know one thing, especially being a member of the STEM community, science, technology, engineering.
I wasn't asked to get a pat down, but then a Spanish man came over to me and asked, is this bag yours? And there was no issue of any inclination toward my bag being flagged by the people who look at it on the computer screen. He said it was simply a random bag check. And he went through every single last item in my bag, pockets and everything. pockets of my clothing too. And meanwhile, I think the rest of my 20-person class or so was sitting there waiting for me for the next 15 minutes. I was the only person of color on that trip. And I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened, but it is tough to believe that you were randomly selected out of a group of other people who don't fit a certain demographic. And this isn't the only case that's happened this way. There are other incidents in airports where I was singled out when I was traveling amongst white and other non-colored friends. So there's repeated instances, and it's more than a sample size of one that kind of tells me this to be the case. I've been interrogated for half an hour to 45 minutes at customs entering into London in the UK, when every person next to me has gone by without an issue.
Well, so I would probably say, I'm trying to think, I don't recall the name of the guy who was shot in St. Louis. But I'm going to spin the question a little bit and say, maybe you're sort of asking, how do I feel that the American police system interacts with people of different race, and maybe specifically black people? I do think there's a problem, and I was thinking about this before, just the different ways of combating racism. And I think one of the most effective ways is just getting more diversity throughout our culture. I think racism it's harder to deal with when you have communities that are all of one race or all of a different race. And so the more that we can have social programs, or we can shape our society to where we have a diverse mix of race, I think that breaks down certain prejudices, because when you're a kid, you're told these things about this group of people, and so when you see this particular race, you say, okay, they have these traits. Okay, some of them negative, some of them positive, and it's not until you really interact with people of that race that you start to understand, like, oh no, this isn't true. Like, these things that I assumed that I was taught when I was a kid aren't true. And so I think having more diversity is important. I talked for a while.
I don't think it's morally, ethically, or on any grounds correct to act this violently towards anybody, regardless of what skin color or anything they might have, or even if they seem to be perhaps participating in illegal activity, even if it is minor to major illegal activity. I don't think this is the way that other people should be treating fellow human beings. That's just not right. Recently I read a book called Bonfire of the Vanities, and this is set in, I think, 1980s New York, and it talks a lot about race, especially in regards to whites and blacks, race relations in the 1980s in New York, involving police action, kind of the assumptions that the courts will make, actions that policemen themselves will make, and then also actions that the upper class, perhaps white people, might take upon themselves, or kind of the thoughts that they have on these sorts of matters. And it's all in a fictional format, so yeah, the author can craft the story to whether they see as fit, but I think it really opens up the envelope on a lot of different issues on this topic.
The Klan is the country's oldest terrorist organization. It's engaged in murder, intimidation, violence, rape, pillage, the worst kinds of crimes.
The history of the Ku Klux Klan is a chronicle of hate in America.
The legacy of the Ku Klux Klan has been white terrorism. We've had a lot of hangings, a lot of bombings, a lot of shootings. That don't bother me at all.
The story of the Klan is one of secrecy, ritual, and misconception.
It was founded as a purely social fraternity, very much like a college fraternity, purely as a source of amusement.
It wrapped itself in the sacred cloth of Christianity and the hallowed fabric of the American flag, becoming the great fraternal organization of the 1920s.
You had governors and senators and legislators elected with the Klan's blessing, and you also had Chief Justice Black of the U.S. Supreme Court. He joined the Klan because he felt it was kind of necessary.
It resurrected itself to combat the civil rights movement and launched a violent revolt against the onrushing tide of black equality. Its leaders sought to mask the terror, but the face of intolerance has always dwelled behind the hood. They are a part of American history we would like to forget, but we cannot. We should not.
Hey, come on and help us!
Today, you can see a number of groups who are like the Klansmen, but they simply are not wearing the white sheets.
The Ku Klux Klan, a secret history.